Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, High School Game Plan Key Steps for College-Bound Eighth Grade Families. We're thrilled to have you with us, whether you're joining us live or you are watching the recording. Thanks for being here. My name is Christina Dooley, and I am the founder and president of Estrella Consulting. Estrella is a full-service college planning firm that works with families across the country and around the globe who are navigating the complex college search process. We've been around for 17 years as a college planning firm. And myself, I've actually worked in higher education in some capacity for more than 25 years. I have worked both as an independent educational consultant, like I'm doing now, as well as having served as an admission officer in a college setting. And I've also worked as a school-based college counselor. So many, many years of experience. I'm the past president of the Independent Educational Consultants Association, which is one of our primary professional associations for people who work as independent counselors. And I am usually wrong according to my children. And my children are right there on the screen, as you can see. I am also a parent of three, yes, three rising ninth grade students, current eighth graders. And so I say that because I want you to know that as parents, I hope it's comforting to you that even though I am a professional in the space with decades of experience, my children also very rarely will believe that I'm correct about these things. So I just wanted to say that my hope for all of you tonight is that you will think that I am correct in the information I'm sharing with you, and that all of these tips are helpful for you as you navigate this process. We're all in this together, and I am certainly going to be experiencing this in a different way in this capacity over the next couple of years. So getting started, I wanted to share this graphic, which I love this image. It's one of my most favorite images to depict what our lives are like and what our paths are like. And I say this because oftentimes we just assume that everything is very linear, that students will do X and that leads to Y and then that leads to Z, and that it's very, very just standard, and that we can predict exactly what will happen, and it's very linear. But in reality, most people's lives and most students' trajectories look much more like the image on the right there, which is our traditional Candyland-esque screen. And so I'd say this to you because I want you to keep this in mind as you begin launching into this college search and application process with your own teenagers, because you need to assure them that there will be times where they need to take a twist or a turn. And really, it's about redirection and finding a way to get them back onto a path. But the reality is that very few people have that really direct linear path to a career or a profession of some sort. And so it's okay to have some of those changes happening all through high school. Decisions will be changing, ideas about what they want to be when they grow up will change. And so I just wanted to say that I actually have this particular image. It actually is very similar to what's on the screen. I have it on a cork board in our house, so that it's a good reminder to all of us about this kind of reality of our pathways. And I would put a plug in if you're not familiar with Liz Fosslien. She has a wonderful collection of drawings like these that really are helpful when we're thinking about our lives and situations that we bump into. And I found that they're really excellent ways to communicate with my teenagers about to demonstrate things happening in their lives and some of the realities. So a little plug for Liz Fossley in there. So let's start off with some just general information and facts that you might want to know about the college process and colleges in general, and what exists now, because it's very, very different than I know when I applied to colleges many years ago. And I'm sure for many of you, if you also attended college, the process right now might seem very, very daunting and a little bit opaque. So in the United States right now, there are about 4,000 colleges alone. And that is a combination of public institutions, private institutions, community colleges. So there are a lot of different options for students. So you can imagine why this feels already so overwhelming to even be thinking about the college search and application. It's a lot of choices that exist. But I do want to share just a couple things that are important to know is that we hear a lot about the selectivity of colleges. We hear a lot about students needing to know what they're going to do as soon as they go into college. There's all this pressure for them to really just have everything kind of mapped out. Again, thinking back to that original visual, it just isn't like that. And so, one of the things I want to point out here, there is a survey that is done of college students that's called the National Survey of Student Engagement, the NESE survey. And essentially, this survey asks students a bunch of questions about their college experience. And these are some of the responses. These first two are some of the responses about from students who are actually in college. So 70% of college freshmen will actually change their mind from what they indicate on their original application for admission. 70%. That's quite a few students who are going in not necessarily undecided, but who go in and maybe are expecting one thing and end up doing something different. It doesn't mean that they're always switching from one extreme to another. For example, they're not necessarily switching from an English major to a biology major, but maybe they're switching from nursing over to biomedical humanities, or they're switching in some way like that. So I say that because it's very normal for students to not necessarily know 100% exactly what they want to do once they get to college and even beyond that. I don't know about you, but I know lots of adult friends, and including myself sometimes, who say, you know what, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up, and I'm an adult. And so, thinking about that, I just want you to give some empathy to your student if they're saying, I don't really know. And also, maybe giving them some grace and a little less pressure about making those choices. We'll talk about how to explore those things in just a few minutes. The next thing is also from that essay survey, and that survey actually asked students, if you've transferred from your original institution, why did you transfer? And the reality is that right now, one out of every three students going into college do transfer. So why are they doing that? Why are they leaving from that original institution? And what that survey has found is that the reasons are not typically having anything to do with academic things in nature. They're pretty much focused on the social aspects of the college. This does not feel like my community. These are not the kinds of people that I want to be surrounded by. And so the social aspects of college are hugely important. So I tell families often that when they go to visit campuses, it's very good for your student to really be taking things in outside of the academic components. You can look at a lot of the academic pieces on websites and course catalogs, but it's really hard to assess the social components just by looking at websites and reading things online even. So we'll talk about campus visits in a few minutes, but that's why that's important. And the other thing I wanted to let you know is that we do hear a lot about the doom and gloom of the selectivity rates of colleges right now, and that it's really hard to get into college and no one's getting in. The reality is that 80% of colleges are actually admitting more than half of their applicants. I'll say that again, 80% of colleges are accepting more than half of their applicants. So that's the majority of colleges. And that's important because the ones that we hear about are what our team at Estrella refers to as highly rejective schools. We hear about the schools that are accepting single digit numbers of single digit percentages of students. And that's just not the vast majority of them at all. They are again, super selective schools. And that's not to say that your student may or may not or shouldn't apply to those selective schools. But just for those of you that are maybe worrying a little bit about, will there be an option for my student? Absolutely. There are colleges for every student, and in fact, there are even colleges that are that accept 100% of their applicants. So there are some who have open enrollment. So that's another just consideration for you is that there are schools out there for every student. A couple of other things: acceptance rates at U.S. schools right now. Right now, the average combining private and public institutions is about 73% of is the average acceptance rate. So again, most schools are accepting a very big portion of their applicants. So again, not doom and gloom when it comes to acceptance rates. One of the questions we get probably the most when we're working with families at Estrella is, what are the things that will matter in the application process? So for all of you parents and guardians of rising ninth grade students, so kids who are just launching into high school, this is part of the impetus of why we decided to actually host this webinar, was because we wanted to get some information into your hands early enough that some of these things that are important, that you and your child could actually pay attention to them, and even have an opportunity to impact some of these things. So We will often hear from families who tell us that their student is adamant that if they're involved in a bunch of things, if they're the captain of a team, if they're a leader, if they're the star in the play, that those kinds of great extracurriculars will overshadow kind of mediocre or poor grades in the classroom. And that's simply not true. This is a survey here that's done of college admission officers every other year. And so the next one actually will be coming out this year in 2025. This one's from 2023 from the National Association for College Admission Counseling. And you'll see there that the very top factor, the most important things that colleges are looking for are the grades that students are taking and the strength of those courses. So are the students taking the most rigorous classes for them? And I'll stress the for them because not every student should be in all AP classes. Not every student should be taking some of the higher level courses that are offered at the school. But if they have the ability to do that and it is appropriate for them to do that, that is what the colleges would like to see. They would not like to see a student that is coming in with straight A's. But is taking classes that are well below their academic abilities. And some of that can be, you might be asking yourself, how would they know? They will know that because the other pieces that come in with the application, you'll see their counselor and teacher recommendations. That's where maybe those things might get cited, but also they can really tell based on a combination of things. Like, again, the grades, if they are standardized tests come in and it shows that the student is doing really exceptionally well on the testing, but they're not taking very challenging classes. Again, that can be a little bit of a red flag for them. You'll notice that the things like extracurriculars are further down that is further down in the list. It's not that it's not important, but it's not something that's going to overshadow grades. So again, that is something that you can really focus on heading into ninth grade is making sure that your student is taking a solid grouping of classes that they can manage. So if they need to have a study hall, that's fine. We know we hear from families sometimes who say, should they add another class instead of a study hall? They're taking challenging classes and they need to study hall, then they should take the study hall. So, but it's is really individual. And this is something where meeting with your school counselor, working with people like us, this is where you can get some of the guidance on course scheduling. I realize course scheduling has already been done for next year for most of you, but certainly these are things that you can still keep in mind every year that the student is in school. And then when I talk about the transition to high school, there's three things I just mentioned for scheduling. With course scheduling, some really tangible tips I want to give you for as families, again, in this particular grade level, is that one of the things that I think is often a missed opportunity for families and for students is taking the appropriate courses in high school that will lead to the kinds of opportunities in college that they're looking for. And the example I'll give you is if you have a child right now who is thinking that they want to do something like engineering, then certainly most engineering programs will want students to have taken a very strong math trajectory, have a very strong grouping of math classes. Same thing with sciences. If you have a student interested in nursing, the colleges of nursing typically want students to have strong science courses with strong lab work. And so you don't want to miss those opportunities. You don't want your student to get to junior or senior year and realize that they don't have the math requirements or the science requirements for some schools. And the way that you would know that, what a little exercise you can go through right now with your teen is, and certainly, and I should say this, that you don't, going into ninth grade, there should be no expectation that your child has a list of colleges already developed. I should say that. And I say that as a parent of three eighth graders who works in this space. There's so much that can change between now and the student's sophomore, junior, senior year. But it is okay if your child isn't always talking about a certain school, or maybe it's always said, I'd love to explore this school as an option, is to get out to their website and look at what their requirements are for admission and look at certain programs that your student might be interested in, because some colleges do admit by major, meaning they're admitting directly into an engineering program program, a business program. Some admit directly into the school as opposed to the individual colleges. So again, just going on and seeing what is required. And as an example, if any of you watching are from California and thinking about University of California schools, there's a very strict outline of what is required for admission. And that's for in-state and out-of-state actually. So if you're thinking of going to UCLA, UC Berkeley, you might want to get on there and see what those requirements are. One other requirement that often goes is missed, and families don't realize that it exists, is that for many high schools and many states, foreign language is not necessarily a requirement for graduation. However, many colleges do require students to have 2 or 3 years of a foreign language. So again, your student is going into ninth grade, they still have an opportunity to be able to fulfill those requirements. You do not want them to get to the junior year and start looking at colleges and realize they won't have an opportunity to fit that in, or then it pushes them to have to do summer courses to get that in. So again, check some of those requirements now. And some colleges are very firm on that and do not have any wiggle room. They require it. Others will have a little bit of leeway, but you'll be able to see that on their websites. The other thing with transition to high school that families often think about or should be thinking about is extracurriculars. And I would say probably one of the things that a myth that we hear often is that students should be signed up for everything. They need to have kind of check boxes in all the things, whether are things like service organizations, athletics, music, volunteer, all these different things. The reality is that your student only has so many hours in their days and in their weeks. And right now, if you Google overscheduled teenager, you will see a bunch of headlines on different things having to do with teens and what the impact is on their mental and physical health when it comes to overscheduling. And I don't say that because your teen should not be involved in things in high school. They absolutely should. They should be looking at opportunities to get involved in things that maybe they haven't been involved in yet, or things that are a deeper dive into areas of interest that they have. So if your student is musically inclined, at the high school level, there'll be many more opportunities for them to get involved in additional performance groups, clubs, opportunities for volunteerism. Maybe it's performing at a local senior home. There's all kinds of things like that. And those are all great. We really encourage students to really dive into the things that bring them joy and that they really want to do. It's also a time, just as a kind of a heads up for you as parents, it's also a time that we see students who say, you know what, I have done this particular activity my entire life and I'm burnt out and I'm done. And you know what? That is just okay. That's totally okay. I know that's heartbreaking sometimes for parents for the amount of time, transportation that you've provided, funds into an activity. But if your child gets to high school and something that they've done forever is something that they decide they don't want to do, colleges will not look, even if it's after ninth grade, if all of a sudden they stop doing something, but they have it on their application that they did it in ninth grade and they don't do it beyond that, the colleges don't look at that and say, here's a quitter. No, what they do is they look at that and they say, that's a kid who's pivoting to something else. And that's where the key is that your student shouldn't just give up and say, I'm done, and then do nothing else. They should be looking at other things, not necessarily just to fill the time, but to give them an opportunity to explore some things. There used to be the phrase well-rounded. When we were all applying to colleges, we would hear that colleges wanted well-rounded students. And certainly they want students who are doing things like community service or volunteerism, students who have jobs. They like to see that, which I will say I had an admission representative who told me once that jobs were like it's just like a hidden, something that they don't really see all that much. And part of that is that overscheduling. Students are so involved in other things that they're actually not working. And so they liked it when they saw students who did have a job. And because obviously that shows different kinds of traits in your student, organization, responsibility, et cetera. So going back to this idea of well-rounded, what many colleges say now is that they really love to see some pointy kids. If you're interested in something, show us how you're interested in it by doing things. And that can be tying in both your academic things with some of your extracurriculars. So for example, if a student says they're interested in biology and potentially going on to medical school, well, there should be some indication during their high school years that they have an understanding of what that means. And that would be by getting into for example, hospital settings, even if that's just a volunteer in a hospital, having the ability to job shadow, all of those things. So again, doing research, all of those things are ways to demonstrate that they actually have an understanding and a deep interest in something. Same thing with things like in the arts. I've had students I mentioned earlier with music who are involved in all the performance groups, but then they also do some things outside. Maybe they're teaching lessons to students. Maybe they're again performing in local centers. Show us that they're pointy. So again, thinking of extracurriculars in that way is really important. And then finally, time management. High school is a great time for students. I just mentioned there's so many hours in the week for them. High school is a great time for them to really learn that responsibility of managing time, figuring out can they support all the things that they want to do with balancing their academics, because again, that is the top thing that colleges are looking for, is how are they doing day in and day out in school. um, how are they balancing that with the things that they're doing outside of school? And so again, this is a great time for them to learn those skills. Heading into college is not the time for them to do that. So anything you can do to support that with them is really, really important. And I mentioned the study hall piece, and that is something that I know us oftentimes, we're hesitant because we want them to add additional courses that might look good on a transcript, but not at the expense of potentially doing poorly in their other classes. So when we talk about extracurriculars, this is kind of just a side tip for you as your child is going into ninth grade, something that they can start doing. You might be thinking, because in the description of this, we talked about the resume and LinkedIn and building those things beginning in high school. You might be thinking that's what adults do. That's what you do if you're an adult and you have a professional resume, you have a career history. But what we've actually found is that many colleges really like for students to have their resume and showing things like their activities, because on the application for admission, this is just kind of a heads up, and with a little asterisk that this is we're 3 years out from this, 4 years out from this, that this may change. But right now on the application, students can only list up to 10 activities that they've been involved in throughout high school, the entire time, just 10. And so a resume allows them the opportunity to list everything that they've been involved in. But it's also a nice way to just keep track of what they've been doing, so that when they do fill out their college applications, they have everything in one spot and they can just transfer it over onto their applications. And then they can also do it in a digital resume version of having a LinkedIn profile. And again, you might be thinking, LinkedIn, that's what I do, not my children. But actually, LinkedIn has started to really target teenagers, because they are trying to encourage students to, again, keep some records of what they're doing in terms of clubs, volunteerism, research I mentioned, and then also connecting with people. They can connect with faculty members if they go on a campus tour and they meet a professor from the nursing school. They can connect with them on LinkedIn. It's just a great way to start developing their broader network. Not rushing them to be adults, but really just again kind of streamlining everything and keeping everything in one place. I'll give a little tip that if you are thinking that you could have your child start to create like a template of a resume, they don't have to have it fully fleshed out. But starting in ninth grade, they could create, for example, on Canva, they can go on and find a template and they can just fill it in. Maybe every year they go back in and they put all the activities that they've been in. And then again, they use that from year to year. They may not be giving it to anybody, but they're just keeping track of everything and having it ready to go. I wanted to mention with extracurriculars, one question that I'm not going to dive deeply into, so I'm just going to head it off because I thought I might get some questions on this. But sometimes I get questions from students and parents who say, I really want to play a sport in college. What do I have to do in high school to be able to do that? One thing I would recommend is that this is a very complex process, actually, with navigating the recruitment process, because there's all different kinds of variables. Could be variables based on the sport, the division that you're interested in, all of those things. NCAA.org has great information about what does the recruitment process look like? How does that work? It also does have, I think, and sometimes this can be heartbreaking for your teen, but it does have some information on there with numbers, so you can see what percentage of high school athletes go on to play at the college level and all the different divisions, and also information about scholarships, because I know there are a lot of high school students who have hopes and dreams of playing a college sport and are hoping that that will be funded through an athletic scholarship. And those numbers are incredibly small, very, very small. And so if you're struggling with that with your teen, sometimes it's better. I mentioned at the very first second slide that my own children don't listen to me. I'm sure that you run into that with your kids. So this is a way to do that, is you can show them. Again, it might be hard for them to hear it, but if you know that maybe they won't be in that pool of recruits, showing them some of that data can help them understand that there are opportunities to do athletics at the college level, but it may not be a Division I scholarship opportunity. It may be a Division III non-scholarship opportunity, but they get to play or they get to do, and that's really important. So again, just wanted to point that out there. So moving into testing, because this is an area that we do get a ton of questions for our rising. We have an early start program for 8th and 9th grade families, and in that early start program, especially when kids get into 9th grade, they start to think about testing. And I will tell you just a couple of tips here is right now, you should not be concerned about your child's testing going into 9th grade in terms of these. There is nothing they need to be doing right now. Let them be a child, let them be a early teen, because once they get into this, it can be a little bit stressful. So in 10th grade, 11th grade, they'll do the pre-test, the pre-ACT or the pre-SAT, PSAT. And one piece of advice I will give you is that the 11th grade PSAT, there are some families who their children have the ability through their school to opt out. They don't have to sit for it. It's in the fall of their junior year. My recommendation to you is they should be sitting for that. One, it's a practice, so they can practice, which if your child plays a sport, an instrument, etc., we know that practice yields better results, right? It's the same with testing. So this is a practice SAT, but it's also the National Merit Qualifying Test. So if your child does not sit for that, they potentially could lose out on opportunities for scholarship funds, depending on how they do. And also, don't go into these tests saying, my child is not a good test taker, they will not perform well. We have seen kids perform incredibly well who had zero expectations of doing well on these tests. So again, fall, junior year, PSAT. ACT and SAT, they're very different tests. I won't get into all the nuances of them, but when we're advising our students, we have a really thorough way of assessing which test is better for them, and then we provide a testing timeline. But most of our students are taking the SAT or ACT typically beginning in the start of 11th grade. We do have some who are doing it second half of the sophomore year because they want to start testing early and get it done. But they don't need to be doing it. They do not need to do it in 9th grade. It is too early. They likely don't have the, for example, English language arts preparation they need. Also, the math sections of these tests are very algebra heavy. So there is no higher level math. There's no calculus, for example, on these tests. So that's just something that you need to know. But they need to have the preparation and all the stuff under their belt before they sit for these. So again, 11th and 12th grade roughly. I will tell you just an interesting data point is that most students will plateau with these tests by their third test sitting. So typically students, if they're, and I'm not telling you that they need to take it 3 times, but they shouldn't take it 7 or 8 times because they will typically by the third test sitting, they will plateau. And again, I mentioned about test prep. It's again, just like a sport or a play or anything that they're practicing for, practicing will ultimately yield higher scores. So, and then the AP exams, those are its own thing because obviously students can start taking AP tests in school and then they'll sit for the AP exam at the end of the school year. The thing at the bottom there says check out fairtest.org. Test optional was something that we heard a lot about during COVID, but it is not new as of COVID. There were many colleges that were test optional before COVID, meaning that they did not require students to submit ACT or SAT tests. And I will say as an aside, I did not mention this a second ago, but one other question we do get is, do colleges prefer one of these tests over the other? No, they don't. Colleges accept them equally. So let me just, I'm going to back up and say that real quick. But fairtest.org, if you're curious, you can go on there and see about 80% of colleges right now are test optional. The list is updated on there daily as colleges make decisions whether or not they will require test scores. I do want to say just a little caveat is that this changes by the month, what schools will be test optional and which won't for the next year. And I'll give you a great example. So I mentioned I'm in Ohio, and I want to give a shout out to one of the test prep companies. We have students work with frequently is Prep Accelerator here in Ohio, and they shared this great chart and information about Ohio State, the Ohio State University. So Ohio State actually just announced about a month ago that they're going back to requiring test scores. So they have been test optional since COVID, but they did an institutional study over a couple of years to see how those kids who came in without tests were doing and faring versus kids who didn't. And what they found is that for them, having test scores is helpful in the admission review process. So they also publish their range of admitted students test scores. So you can see on pretty much most college websites will share with you what their middle 50% range is so that your child can have an idea and you can have an idea of what kind of scores would be competitive for this school. And so that range will change as schools go back to requiring test scores. I say that because for Ohio State, their test score range, their middle 50%, as you can imagine, being test optional, only kids with high scores have been submitting. So over the next 2 years, I would imagine that that score may go back to a slightly lower number. We'll see. But again, just keep that in mind as you're looking at this and pay attention to the test optional piece. Don't assume that your child won't submit scores. Students should go into high school if they are college bound with a plan to sit for those tests because they may run into schools that do require them. Okay, so exploring careers and majors as at our kids' age. How does that happen? So, with my own children, for example, if you ask them, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" It could change by the day, and so we discourage families from really trying to force kids to come up with that choice at this stage and this age because they just don't know. They haven't been exposed to enough things. So what we do at Estrella, and I'll just mention this, that this is something that actually we offer as a service to families, is we do some aptitudes and career assessments that are helpful for teens to basically look into what are the things that they're naturally good at and intersected with the things that they enjoy, because a student can be very good at something and really dislike doing it. So if a student is very good at math, it does not mean that they necessarily want to be an engineer, for an example. So um, I just mentioned that because aptitudes and assessment kind of things like this are helpful. Other ways that students can explore jobs or careers are summer opportunities. So there's tons of summer opportunities that exist, both paid and free. And depending on what part of the country or the world that you're in, you might want to encourage your teen to start looking not necessarily for this summer going into ninth grade, but potentially between ninth and 10th, 10th and 11th, 11th and 12th. Maybe there are opportunities for them to do a little bit of exploration in areas that they're thinking of. So a couple of things I shared here. I'm outside of Cleveland. The Cleveland Clinic has a summer internship program for high school students. It's awesome. We've had multiple students who have done it, and it really gives them great exposure to working in a healthcare setting. And so it also can help students realize that something is not for them. So that's great. NASA, the NASA Glenn Research Center outside of Cleveland, again, this is a local thing for me, but I thought I'd share it because you might have something similar in your area. They're offering free engineering programs for kids this summer, which I think is amazing because, again, someone might think they want to do something, but until they actually try it, they may not realize what it entails or what all goes into it. There's also some research opportunities through organizations, companies like Polygence and Lumiere. We've had students do summer research through those companies. They are companies that charge a fee for mentored research. So the student is paired with a mentor who helps them with researching. And these are things that they can put on their college applications that they've done research. Some of these students are presenting their research in the form of a paper at the end. Maybe sometimes they could even be giving presentations at a conference. And again, these are high school kids. So if you have a student who's really motivated in that way and curious and interested in research, they can do that in high school. And then the last thing I'll mention is Coursera. I love this because even in the description, they say from calculus to guitar for beginners. They have everything from academic things to culinary arts to there was one that was bugs 101, learning about bugs. So if you have a kid who's curious and interested in something and they want to explore it more, they can do that through Coursera, and they have a lot of free courses on there that are short, and they can take them and say, yeah, I really loved that. I'd want to do more. I had a student a couple years ago who did some coding classes through Coursera, and it was awesome. It confirmed to him that he wanted to be a computer science major, and again, saved Remember that 1 in 3 kids transferring and that 70% kids changing their mind about what they want. It saved some of that back and forth. So they were able to really determine what they wanted to do. And then the last thing in terms of exploring college options are campus visits. So going into ninth grade, this is not necessarily the time that students should be going on formal campus visits, meaning visits scheduled through the admission offices. And in fact, many colleges won't even allow students to come and visit campuses until maybe they're a sophomore or even sometimes after sophomore year. But I know that we have lots of friends, family friends who maybe do summer trips. They do road trips somewhere, or maybe they go somewhere every year, or they're planning a trip to Boston, or they're going to LA, or they're even just taking a camper and going somewhere. And if you know that you're going to be going near campuses that potentially could be of interest to your teen, or if you just want to expose them to what campuses look like, because a lot of students have zero idea of what when you say big school, what does that mean? Their vision of a big school might actually be more of a mid-sized school or even a small school, depending on how big their high school is, because big is relative. And same thing with things like urban and rural. So just exposing them to campuses and styles of campus is a really great thing to start doing. If you're on the road and you're somewhere already, take advantage of some of those times, and let them kind of see what's happening. One piece of advice I'll give you is for any trip that you go on to visit a campus, never lead with your opinion after the visit. Meaning, don't say, wasn't that a great school? I really loved that." Or, "Oh, that was not a nice campus." Don't lead with your opinion. What you should do is you should say, "So tell me what you thought. What were the highlights of that place for you? What were the things that you were surprised by?" Eh, Very open-ended questions for them, because if you lead with your opinion, they will likely follow. And so it's again something to just keep in mind as you start to think about college exploration with your students and with your teens, is let them give you their opinion first, because again, they're taking their cues from you. So again, campus visits, kind of fun to do that. Get them the t-shirt in the bookstore, that kind of thing. Okay, finally, let's talk just for a few minutes about college affordability. We could talk for hours about the cost of college, how to pay for it, all those things. This is a very deep dive thing. We do a lot of like decoding college costs sessions with our families. But what I want to talk about here is costs of college right now. If you look, you see in the headline right there, Vanderbilt is over $100,000 a year tuition and fees. That's insane when you think about it. However, what I do want to talk about is how to really view the college cost piece of it, because the likelihood for many families that they're going to pay sticker price is not very high. Some of it depends on um, one, it could be your family need. Another could be scholarship funds that your student is getting. There's all different kinds of ways to make college affordable. But I will say there are some situations where colleges will not be affordable for you. And knowing that at the onset of the search process versus at the end when your child's trying to make a decision, I can tell you is very helpful, because the last thing you want is a disappointed child because you can't make it work and you knew that from the start. So there are lots of ways that you can kind of explore college costs. One would be to start looking at college costs right now and looking at what are things like average scholarship funds for schools. My favorite myth that I hear all the time from families or from students is, so and so at my high school got a full scholarship to Dartmouth or to Penn, name any of the Ivies, and in fact, that's not true, because the Ivy League, which I should say, another fun fact to impress your friends, is the Ivy League, if you didn't know, is actually an athletics league. That's why it's called the Ivy League. 8 schools, they actually have a policy amongst all 8 of those schools that they actually don't award scholarship money. They don't have merit scholarships based on grades, because everyone applying to those schools would be eligible. And so they do have very generous need-based aid based on financial affordability. So as you're looking at schools, if your child's already talking about their dream school right now, have them go on and give them an assignment to go on and look at the information about costs and how much are families getting in terms of need-based aid, gift aid, which is scholarships, and talk through that in a realistic way with them. It's really important. And there's a couple different ways, again, that families are affording college. There's institutional aid, which is through the college. So that would be scholarships, grants through the college based on your family's financial need. Your financial information that will be used, and this is if you're taking something away right now about the financial piece of things, take this tip for you. The financial information that you will put on the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA, which has been around since we all went through the college search process, the FAFSA form will be looking at your 2027 tax information. I know we're not there yet, but basically they look at what is called the prior year from when your child is enrolling. So our children are enrolling in 2029. They will be looking at 2027 tax information. So this is a good time. Again, tip for entering high school from an affordability and financial standpoint. This is a great time for you to start thinking about financial planning. How will you afford it? Do you have a 529, for example, for your children, for your child? And maybe sometimes we have families who will work with a financial planner to figure those things out. But again, this is the time to do that because you don't want to get to junior year and realize you hadn't really considered some of those things. So again, great time to do it. Uh, Institutional, that aid again is based on the FAFSA, and merit aid is scholarship money. So again, looking at how generous schools are. The government, certainly there's government grants and loans as well that exist if you file that FAFSA form. Then there are outside scholarships that are available, and that's typically not happening until later in high school and typically mostly in senior year. So we have, I will say just a little plug that throughout the course of the year, and if you're not signed up for our e-newsletters with Estrella, I would encourage you to do that. There'll be a little QR code at the end of the presentation that you'll see that you can sign up. We offer webinars, multiple per month on different topics, and we do some really awesome ones on scholarships and financial aid. So pay attention to when those come up and sign up for them. I will say all of these pieces of information, I'll have just a little asterisk because, as you know, a lot of this information, especially when it comes to things like government aid and loans, a lot of this is based on basic current administration guidelines. And so things can change from year to year. So we're right now in 2025, certainly things can change. Even on that FAFSA form, things can change between now and when your family actually files it. So, but the looking into the affordability piece, you can absolutely do that now. I just mentioned our YouTube channel. We have so much content on there already. All of our webinars that we host are recorded and uploaded to the YouTube channel. You can go onto that and see past webinars that we've done, everything from very specific things like selective college admission to things like career based. So we just did one on careers of professional golf management aligned with the week of the Masters. And so you can check that out. You can share those with your teen as well. Some of them are really fun. We have some interviews with people in different careers on there as well. So definitely check that out. And then a couple of recommended readings that we have for you. There's a lot of we are big proponents of books still. There's a lot of really great books that exist there. The first two here, Never Enough and Emotional Lives of Teenagers, those are excellent books for parents to get an understanding of what teens are going through. I mentioned already the mental toll that's happening with kids, and it's real. There's a lot of reality to some of the stress that kids are under right now, and probably you yourself as well, watching them go through some of those things. And so those two books are excellent. I 100% recommend those. The Price You Pay for College, that's a great book for anybody who has some concerns about the financial pieces, which I think probably most of us do, about how are we going to pay for this? This is a big investment. So this book by Ron Lieber, The Price You Pay for College, is excellent. It's an easy read. You can understand. It's a layman's term kind of book. And then the last one on this screen, Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be, is probably hands down one of my favorite books in this space because this book essentially talks a little bit about why do we go to college? What's the purpose of it? And what does name brand have to do with outcomes? And so this is a really good book, especially if you've got a student who has their eyes set on, again, some of those highly rejective schools. You know, if they're looking at really, really tough to get into colleges, this might be a good read for you and just to give you a sense of how you might be able to communicate with your teen. Again, not discouraging them from going through the motions of applying and doing that because you don't know. We have students every year who apply to and get into very selective schools, the Ivies. But we also have students sometimes who really have their eyes set on things, and then after some realization, realize that maybe it's not worth the stress to do that, and they should focus on schools where maybe they have a very strong opportunity for admission. The last set of books here, these are also excellent. Who Gets In and Why was written by an author who spent a year in a couple of different admission offices. So it's kind of like a behind the curtain look at what happens when colleges are reviewing applications. The Truth About College Admission is a guidebook. It's actually really helpful, very basic things like it says on there, talking about college costs with your teens. So how do you have that affordability talk with them? How do you talk about college rankings with them? How do you understand those things? How to Raise an Adult is a little bit of an older book, but it's excellent. Again, it's more of a parenting book, and it has a lot of really excellent, tangible tips in there for parents in terms of getting your kids to the point where they're going to college. And the last one, if you have a child with any kind of learning needs that you are concerned about at the college level, this is it. Excellent book. Elizabeth Hamblett is brilliant in this book and shares some really great tips for students with learning differences and disabilities as they head on to college. So I'm going to go ahead and see. So we have a couple of questions I'll answer real quickly. We've got just a couple of minutes. So the first question here is how is AI impacting the college application process? Oh, that's a great question. So artificial intelligence, what we're seeing actually is the only real thing that you see a lot in the news is about things like chat GPT and essays. And so what we're seeing obviously is just a lot of schools messaging out to students not to use those things in their essays. So that's, I think pretty basic information. But what we're seeing from the college side, and this is kind of interesting, especially for kids in our kids' grade, is that is a significant rise in majors and programs at colleges coming up that are related to that, teaching kids how to use it for good. A lot of really cool programs that I've seen as I've visited colleges in that space. So that's a really good question. The second question here is, should we be attending local college fairs as ninth grade families? So yes, I actually think that attending college fairs in your area, if you see something published that there is a group of colleges, for example, coming to town and they'll be exhibiting, a great example is the National Association for College Admission Counseling. You can go onto their website, NACAC, and they list national college fairs on there. There are college fairs all around the United States. They have them every month. There's one somewhere, and everywhere from Chicago to Cleveland to Columbus to LA to Miami. And those fairs have hundreds of college admission officers there, and you have a little badge that they scan, and it allows you to get input it into their system to get information. But it's a very low commitment type of event to go to because you can get a sense of the wide variety of colleges that exist, and it gets your student kind of thinking about it. So again, yes, ninth grade, they could absolutely do that. The next question, how can we how can we start connecting with the colleges outside of the fairs that you just mentioned? Okay, so here's a really great tip, and this is maybe something your student can work on even over this summer, next summer, whenever they have got some of that downtime. Is maybe they can come up with a list of schools that they're thinking of. Again, they need to know that they are a fit for them, but they don't necessarily have a sense yet of fit. So it's okay for them to start exploring by going on to college websites, and on every college website under the admission section, they will see that there is typically a form there, an inquiry form that they can fill out where they can input their information and they can begin receiving information. I do want to say one myth that I want to bust right now that is hard to hear sometimes for students, and you may have to be the bearer of bad news of this with your teen when this starts happening, is once your student sits for any of those exams I mentioned earlier, PSAT, ACT, SAT, the colleges are able to actually purchase lists of student names and contact information based on a list of criteria that they provide to either the ACT organization or the college board who hosts the SAT and PSAT. They can say, we would like to purchase a list of students who are from this geographic region, who scored within this range. And I'll tell you, even schools like MIT, their range is not as high as you'd think. They still, well, and this is why their acceptance rates are so low, because they send mailers out to all these kids, and kids feel like, oh my gosh, MIT just sent me a flyer in the mail. They must really want me to attend. And I don't want to discourage your kids and say that that is completely untrue, because they probably would love to have many of your kids. But it is not necessarily targeted recruitment in the way that the student often thinks it is, or the parent. It is literally thousands of those that get sent out, and it's a way for them to begin pulling kids into their funnel. So if your child starts to wonder, how are they getting my name? That is how that happens. When they register for those tests, they are checking off a little box that says that they're willing to get information from colleges. So be prepared, especially once they sit for that PSAT and or PACT in the early 10th and 11th grade. They'll start to get all that information. But in the meantime, it's okay for your child to go on and start filling out some of those inquiry forms and starting to get information about schools, just so they can begin some early exploration. So that's all the questions that I have that have been put into our Q&A. But if there's anything that we can be helpful with, I've mentioned that we have the e-newsletter sign up right there. We also offer families a complimentary consultation if they want to learn more about ways that we support families one-on-one at Estrella. Please, by all means, feel free to reach out through our Estrella Consulting website. There's a form on there that you can fill out. You can also just email us and we'll get you set up with that. But in the meantime, as a fellow parent of 2029 kiddos, I wish you luck on this journey, and it'll be exciting. There'll be times where it will be stressful, but I hope that everyone is excited to go through this with their teen. It'll be fun, and we'll just all support one another through it. So thanks for being here, and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.